and that is another point too. California's version of this law does appear to be the most restrictive, even with the new provisions passed by New York that incorporate microstamping requirements. Most of these other states have much longer lists of, like Maryland, for instance, has a roster, but their roster lists out guns that you can't buy and presumes everything else is legal, whereas California does the opposite. And there's only, I believe, about 800 models listed, and a lot of those are duplicates. Is that right?
So there's 800 models on the roster. I believe only 500 are semi-auto handguns, because revolvers are on the roster as well. And then specifically within that 500, there is color variations of the same firearms that make it on there. So the actual list of models, what we would consider a model, I would consider a green Glock 19 the same essentially as a black Glock 19. The list of models that is available is significantly smaller. And I think the first cases that went up and challenged this, at the time, there was thousands. And then very shortly after that, it went down to the current-ish number of about 800. So they said that because there were plenty of other handguns to choose from, that it was constitutional, because we still had the ability, in theory, to purchase a wide variety of handguns for various purposes. Now the list is getting smaller and smaller.
And isn't there a provision now that any new gun added to the list, you have to remove 3 old guns, and it's just sort of
so let's say someone manages to bring a micro-stamped equipped semi-auto handgun to the market. Let's just say they manage to do it. If that makes it onto the roster, 3 models that are not to the current standard get removed. I'm not aware of the specific process, or if the state has a specific process in place for which models get removed. But to me, that doesn't make sense, because eventually, I think if we did the math, there's about 500. So we would need a third of that. A company could, in theory, produce a firearm that's capable of passing all the tests and has loaded chamber indicators, magazine disconnect, micro-stamping. They could produce one gun, make, 120-ish color variations of it, or maybe they just add a slight difference that makes it a different gun on the roster. And then the only handguns that we'd be able to purchase would be some of the revolvers that are still on the list and all of those micro-stamped equipped firearms.
Right. But I guess it is somewhat moot at this point, because there haven't been new guns added. So this remove 3 hasn't gone into effect because they just don't add any. And then we've reported in the past in the recent past, actually, on some models being removed from the list as well over really completely unclear reasons. Was it H&K USPs were removed?
Almost all of the H&K USPs were removed, and it's, again, we don't know why. As far as I'm aware, I don't believe it's known specifically, but many people are rumoring. So like I said earlier, we can only get Gen 3 Glocks made in America. If something about how they make that firearm changes in any significant way, and it could be very insignificant in my opinion, it's no longer on the roster. We saw this with the Franklin Armory with these Franklin Armory bolt action pistols that made it on the roster. They were initially selling them with metal 10-round magazines. At some point, there became a supply chain issue, and they wanted to sell them with Magpul mags. Well, that meant they had to get that version with Magpul mags on the roster. So it could be very easy to see that with the HKs, maybe they started sourcing some of the springs differently. Maybe they got different parts from a different country or a different supplier, and that would change its roster status, even though the gun is spec'd identically. If something changes about how they make it or what they source parts or where they source certain parts, it can change whether or not they are approved. Which, doesn't make sense, but that's the best estimate. That's the best guess we have as why the H&Ks got removed.
Yeah, it's just all these factors seem to really undermine the whole idea that this list is about. Even if you're taking the law at face value and assuming it's in good faith, like there's a lot of things they do to remove guns or exclude them that have nothing to do with safety features. I mean,
Correct.
have nothing to do with the magazine disconnect or loaded chamber indicator or even the microstamping. I mean, it's just sort of arbitrary. And then obviously they do a lot of things like allow the police to continue to carry these unsafe firearms. And it's just it's hard to look at objectively and not come away with the idea that it doesn't have much of anything to do with the handgun safety, especially if you're trained in firearms. I'm a certified instructor, and you're obviously an experienced shooter, and the features that they want are like
they're not making
really
a gun
necessary.
more or less safe. And it could be very easily argued, and I believe in the initial filings they mentioned that the loaded chamber indicator does not make a gun more safe because you can't rely on that. It's always the shooter's responsibility to check and ensure whether a gun is loaded or not. And a magazine disconnect. That's the
thing about any manual safety.
Yeah. You can't rely on the physical safeties, and you have to kind of take it that they are arguing these in good faith. But when you try to look at it objectively in good faith, it really falls apart with all the things that you said about why they're removing guns, why they're allowing certain people to purchase them, but not others. And then the features that they're requiring, it's hard to wrap your head around it in their point of view, assuming that they're in good faith, that they're arguing this in good faith.